WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Now that the football season's over and the real off season with where quarterbacks are going to sit and where the owners are going to be in a couple of weeks. And of course, a new president here in Baltimore will be covering all that. Luke is out in Owings Mills. I see this guy at football games, and I have over the last 10 or 15 years, probably because he was writing about such things, and our football team's been pretty good around here this century. He now makes his home at the New York Post, but he is out on a book trail. And much like when I had, Jason Cole on trying to sell a John Elway book in Baltimore, a Mike Krzyzewski book here in Maryland. If it doesn't come with that little kid crying in the ACC tournament 20 years ago on the cover, I don't know how it's going to sell, but the book is all about Coach K. And for all of us who have left the ACC, and I still hear from all of you that still want to be back in the ACC, where our coaches don't take swings at other coaches. Coach K, the rise and reign of Mike Krzyzewski. I don't know if we would really know how to pronounce Krzyzewski. Ian O'Connor joins us here from New York, where I saw the great John Mayer in the center of the universe, right there, 33rd, 34th Street on Monday night. I should have called you for a beer, dude. How are you?
How are you, Nestor? Thanks for having me.
Well, the book's out. I've been seeing you talk about it, write about it. Certainly everybody here, this is very familiar turf for what Coach K is. I remember going back and getting those old Toyota ACC books with Buck Williams back in 78, 79, 80. And Duke was just another team in the ACC. It was just another school on Tobacco Road. What a story over the course of my lifetime for taking something from someplace to someplace else, and college basketball as well. You have a very fertile topic for subject matter, right?
I think so. And I got a little lucky, Nestor, when I started the project more than 2 years ago. I had no idea that Coach K would announce his retirement in advance and make this his victory tour season. So that helps the book, of course. And if they can make a deep run, which they're very capable of doing, that would also help the book. But yeah, when you talk about Coach K's start at Duke, it was turbulent, man. He could have gotten fired very easily. The boosters, the alums, the faculty, the students, the fans, they all wanted him out of there. And I don't even know how he got the job in the first place. He was 9-17 at Army when he got hired at Duke. Bob Knight put in a word for him, but the AD there, Tom Butters, made one of the greatest decisions in the history of college sports. Well, he actually did it twice. He hired the guy.
What year was that, by the way?
We're talking 1980.
80. Okay. So my books predated him. I'm just trying to think of exactly where the Hollands and where the lefties, and Dean was always there, right? But all of those moving parts back then, I mean, it was ultra competitive. It was the most competitive conference there was, right? This is a top job to get a Duke job or a Wake job at that point, right?
No question. And Bill Foster had taken Duke to the national championship game a couple years earlier. They lost to Kentucky, but he suffered and struggled with the magnitude of Dean Smith's legend, and just seemed to really bother him on a fairly regular basis that he was always in Dean's shadow. So he left, and it opened the job. He went to South Carolina, and the candidates it wasn't the most impressive field of candidates you'd ever seen, but Mike Krzyzewski really shouldn't have won that job just based on his last season at Army, which was record-wise anyway, terrible. So Tom Butters saw something in him. Mike came in and won the interview process. But those first few years at Duke, he loses to Wagner at home, a bad Wagner team in the ECAC Metro, a team that was losing to LIU and St. Francis of New York. And so they beat Duke in Cameron, and the fans and the boosters are absolutely calling for his head. Ultimately, Butters gives him a 5-year contract extension, which seemed really crazy at the time. And he had a conversation with Bob Knight about that, whether or not he should do it. Knight felt he should. And the rest is history. It's a recruiting class. And I know there was the ESPN documentary, The Class That Saved Coach K. It was the player and the point guard who saved Coach K, and Johnny Dawkins. Johnny Dawkins changed everything for Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. And as they say, the rest is history.
You know, I went down the Tobacco Road back in the late 80s into the early 90s. The Dean Dome was brand new. Dean was still there, and it was a Dean Dome at the time. And I think of Krzyzewski and Dean as being contemporary, right? You know, I mean, in my world, because I was born in 68. I mean, Krzyzewski, I was 12 when Krzyzewski was hired, right? So I'm a kid loving basketball, loving sports. I've made a life doing this. And the fact that he's still there And the fact that the Maryland fans hated him forever, and it was all, all of that. But Maryland was never their rival. It's kind of like the Yankees and the Red Sox. The rest of us just think we have a rival. We really don't. And what Carolina basketball represented at that time, I mean, the fight song and Dean Smith and the recruiting trail and everything that went on there, and how Roy Williams was going to be the next thing. And I had Matt Doherty on the show this week as well. So there's been a history there of all of that. There's been nothing but Coach K at Duke, and he exits it with they're on a different plane, kind of like the Red Sox caught the Yankees at some point 15 years ago. Somehow, some way, he exits, and Duke is greater than probably than any of his vision could have been when he took a basketball job 40 years ago. When you think about what Duke is known for, aside from a small little gym where they play basketball, but the kind of university that it aspired to be.
Yeah, he's meant so much to that university. The endowment, how much has he contributed? It'd be impossible to really measure the tangible effect that Krzyzewski's had on that school all across the board and well beyond the basketball court. And he's the most famous university employee in America of any sort. So he's probably made more money at one school than anyone has ever made at any school in the history of this country. So 42 years later, 5 national titles, 12 Final Fours. I actually put him ahead of John Wooden as the greatest coach of all time. Everybody, hold on a second. Everybody over 60 thinks I'm crazy when I say that, but the younger people can understand it. I know it's 10-5 national titles, 10 for Wooden, 5 for Krzyzewski, maybe 6 this year. They both went to 12 Final Fours, but Krzyzewski has 530 more wins than Wooden had. Durability matters to me, Nestor, and I also think he did it in a much more difficult time and place in college basketball. You look at one and done, the transfer portal now, but for most of his career, having to deal with a lot of change in college hoops. And Wooden had players for 3 years. Granted, they were ineligible for most of his coaching career as freshmen, but he had those players for 3 years. There is so much more parity now, so many more teams and cable stations and channels that give visibility to programs. And you have to win more games to win the NCAA tournament now than Wooden did. So when you put all that together, at the end of the day, 530 more victories than the Wizard, I'd go Krzyzewski 1 and Wooden 1A.
Ian O'Connor controversy here. John Wooden did my show once. We shared the same birthday, October 14th. So he's a real hero of mine, and all the ideology and all of that. So it is fascinating because I remember Wooden as a kid, and Walton, and not Jabbar at UCLA, but certainly Jabbar at Milwaukee, which a lot of people seem to forget about. But through the course of my lifetime, now that I'm getting older, and a guy like Krzyzewski becomes the living Beatle, right? That sort of does this tour in this way at 75. Hard for me to even think of him at 75, but I think about not just outliving and outlasting Dean Smith, but I feel like, he coached against Lefty for almost a decade, right? I mean, until against Len Bias, like all of that. But how many coaches we've been through, and how Gary won his championship, just wore out here and just said, I'm not paying players, I'm done, and just left and moved on, put his name on the floor and rolled on. We're going back at, over a decade now for that. So how many eras he outlasted and lasted. Tell me about the book and the story you're trying to portray, because I guess there's evil Coach K, and there's wonderful Coach K, and there's small town Chicago Coach K, and then there's shoe deal Coach K, and there's we're not going to put your name on the roof if you don't play here for 4 years and graduate, and then all of a sudden Suleiman's playing for the Terps 10 years ago. So so much has changed and all that, and the book could be literally the Iliad, right? I mean, this is a 5-decade story, right?
Well, I reduced it to 153,000 words, Nestor, and it wasn't easy to do that.
Congratulations.
Belichick was over 200,000. In retrospect, I probably should have cut that down a little bit more. That was a long book. But yeah, the narrative thread to me running through it is his upbringing and being the son of the children of immigrants who were discriminated against, who were spent their adult lives laboring without neither one finished high school, laboring for wealthy people. And that had an impact on Mike. So did his father's decision to change his name from Krzyzewski to Cross to avoid discrimination in terms of educational and employment opportunities, and telling his two sons, Mike and Big Bill, we don't want you taking Polish language courses at St. Helen because we need you to make a complete break from the homeland and to make it in this country. So I think that experience, though, he lived a bit of a charmed existence in Chicago, blue collar street kid, but playing sports with his buddies. They called themselves the Columbos. It was a gang in name only. Sports day and night. They stayed out of trouble. The real gangs left them alone because they thought they were harmless. And so he had this charmed childhood to some degree. But I feel that the rage within, the competitive rage that is there, and listen, there's a lot of Bob Knight inside of Mike Krzyzewski to this day. He just goes up to the line and never crossed it the way Knight did. But I think that's fueled by what he saw in his parents and the fact that his mother was a cleaning lady for people who were better off than she was and had only 2 dresses hanging in the closet, perfectly pressed at all times. And his father labored and worked, and really his friends didn't even know his father, didn't know what he looked like. He wasn't around. He was just working all the time. He was grinding. And so I think that childhood really shaped who he is and was, and how he fought for everything. And there was some paranoia there where he, I think, feared people taking things away from him. And I really think that was rooted in his upbringing and his parents' experiences.
Did he ever consider taking another job? I mean, really, like, I'm sure the NBA, I'm sure the Celtics called. I don't even remember all the ish that happened through all the years, but I never felt like he wanted the Kansas job. It never felt like he wanted the UCLA job. It never felt like he wanted any other job. I mean, Roy Williams, the whole time he's rock chalking, you knew he was greasing it up for North Carolina. And, I guess I felt that way about Gary as I wear my State Fair shirt here with the Maryland logo, as we, our flag's a cult, as you well know, Ian. And Coach K, for folks here in Maryland, sits at the epicenter of evil. I mean, he is the Yankees, he is the Steelers, he is the Grinch. He's all. I don't want to put him up with Putin because Putin's had a bad week. Mike's a better guy than that, but he's the bad guy here, right, on this side of the story. And I think he liked that. I think and I don't think he gave a crap about it in College Park or even the ACC. I think it mattered in the triangle, right? And then it mattered when he walked into a room and a guy like you would say, there's Coach K. He's better than Wooden, right? I mean, to think about how many enemies he had to make, because they beat everyone all the time at recruiting, at getting money, at once the tournament started, he was there at the Final Four and you weren't. And they were the small school. They weren't the state school. They didn't have all of the trappings that, let's say, SEC football has. He just, and he did it when John Thompson did it at Georgetown. I mean, I keep going back to a time and a place where it just was different. I think the ACC was perceived different in 1982.
Oh, no question. And I'd call it competitive arrogance that he had, this unbending belief in himself that may be fueled by that feeling that he had to protect all fronts at all times and don't let people take things away from me. He was a blue collar street kid and a fighter from Chicago. And to me, that was the essence of who he was. What was interesting, Nestor, in doing research for this book and talking to hundreds of people and asking them, how important is his image to him? The fact that Duke is perceived anyway as this shining city on top of a corrupt hill that is major college athletics. And to a man, the players told me that's not nearly as important to him as winning. Just beating you, whether it's Nestor or Ian or the opposing coach or an administrator at Duke who's giving him a hard time on that particular day. He wants to win. He just wants to beat you. One longtime assistant coach at Duke told me, Mike wakes up in a stance and then he attacks a day and he's just looking at the end of the day to be ahead of you in whatever it is. And that the whole Duke is the last clean program in America thing. Yeah, it was important, but it wasn't nearly as important as him beating you. And that was everything to him. Now, I thought it was more of a 50-50 split going into this book, but his players said, no, it was just all about winning.
Well, everybody was cheating, right? I mean, come on. I mean, that's That is the story. The story is the unwritten story about what it took to get whatever kid to what other campus and to deliver. And once the AAU pipeline got set up and all the things that Gary sort of lamented around here out of the side of his mouth after he won as to why he wouldn't stick around. Krzyzewski swam in that cesspool. I mean, like it was the whole thing was a mess, as you pointed out. And yet, the Final Four is in Minnesota, Indianapolis, but wherever, San Antonio, wherever it was, he usually had a seat.
That's for sure. And listen, Bob Knight's relationship with Krzyzewski fell apart, of course, at Pinehurst in 2015, which I detail in my book. But Bob Knight had little respect for John Wooden because he felt that there was a booster there who was taking care of players, and Wooden used willful ignorance as a weapon. And listen, the college coaches today, willful ignorance is a tool that they need to use. It needs to be part of their toolbox, if you will.
Paterno did that too, right?
Well, that was much worse. You were not talking about players receiving improper benefits under NCAA law. We're talking about obviously a more heinous thing.
Whatever it takes to win. To your point, he just wanted to win.
Yeah, and he just wanted to win. And listen, if somebody's going to give a kid something that's not allowed under NCAA rules, if I don't know about it, okay, I'm not going to go crazy. I do believe this. Mike Krzyzewski, at his heart, he would want the whole thing to be clean, but he knows it isn't, and he's not willing to lose to cheaters. Okay, so he's not going to cheat himself. He's not going to directly give a kid an improper benefit as it's defined by the NCAA. But if a third party does it and he doesn't have to know about it, then so be it. And by the way, Duke did use a player who wasn't eligible in 1999 when they went to the NCAA championship game with one of his greatest teams and lost to UConn. Corey Maggette should have been ineligible for all 39 games, but all 37 victories should have been probably taken away from Coach K. Happened to other coaches. It was only $2,000, but it made him ineligible to play college sports at that level. And they found out after the fact, and the NCAA has taken victories away from other coaches under similar circumstances. And in this case, they said, well, Duke didn't really have any reason to know this, so we're not going to dock Coach K those 37 wins. And I talked to coaches who says who? At other schools, those victories would have been taken away. And it's a very subjective thing. And I had one coach who competed against Mike for a long time say, whenever something comes up at Duke in terms of potential NCAA violations, someone finds a sinkhole somewhere and flushes it. And so there is a great belief out there in college basketball that the NCAA always gives Duke the benefit of the doubt in these situations because it needs Duke. It wants Duke to be that shining city because they're basically the last man standing, and the NCAA wants to keep it that way.
Ian O'Connor is here. He writes books about greatness or perceived greatness in this case, and certainly the Belichick story is a little similar with the Patriots, and that city's too bright to tear down. We'll just look the other way on Spygate, Deflategate, whatever. You write about these topics, and you write about great golfers. The book, where does the idea come for the book? And at this point, to your point, a couple of years, and it turns out he's leaving at the same time. But to take on a book, I've written a couple of books. It's not for the faint of heart. It makes you very antisocial, Ian.
Hey, I have a day job too, so it's like having two full-time jobs. It really is. Belichick made it tougher on me because he campaigned against me, and he lobbied people and reached out and asked a whole bunch of people not to talk to me. And so I had to pitch around a lot of hurdles there to make that thing work. I feel like the Patriots are the Kremlin, maybe Duke's the CIA. But at the start of the Belichick process, I felt like I was at the bottom of Mount Everest looking straight up. And it was a great challenge, probably the greatest challenge of my professional career. Hopefully, I believe I conquered it, but I'll let the readers be the judge of that. Krzyzewski told me through his PR person, John Jackson, that he would not block anybody, but he would not participate himself. So the challenge was still there. Duke's a pretty secretive organization, if you will.
Do you know Mike at all?
Not really. No.
Fair enough. Yeah. I've been at a couple of press conferences, but I've never really ever met him.
Yeah. And I've had some one-on-ones with him over the phone and been in small groups with him. He said he was asked about my book yesterday in a Zoom presser, and he said some nice things about me. Anyway, he said I was one of the best writers in the country. He hadn't read the book yet, so if he does read it, hopefully he feels the same way. I'm not sure he will or not, but we'll find out.
Is it all flattering in your mind?
No. I mean, if you look at the excerpts, some Duke fans were concerned that this was some sort of takedown of Coach K, which it isn't. But the negatives had to be explored, and you couldn't have an honest, thorough, definitive account of. I do think it's a great American life, but you need the negatives in there, or else it's not honest. Nobody's perfect, and he's made his share of mistakes. And so one thing is he has a very hard time saying I'm sorry. Whenever he has to apologize for something, what he does is, hey, I was wrong, but you know what, Nestor, you were wrong too. And there have been many cases like that at Duke. And most recently, perhaps, is when the students were chanting at Jeff Capel and the Cameron Crazies, and he went off on them because he thought they were chanting something negative at his former assistant, now the head coach at Pitt, when they were chanting sit with us because he's one of them. He was a Duke grad and a Duke assistant. So Mike went off, realized he was wrong, and said, well, I'm sorry. I guess I was wrong. I didn't really hear what the chant was, but they were wrong too, because you can't be chanting at the visiting coach during a game. We've got to come up with something different than that. just, hey, I screwed up. I apologize. It won't happen again, and move on. But historically, that's just one case. There've been many others. He has a very hard time just saying I'm sorry, which I find actually kind of humorous.
Ian O'Connor, the book is Coach K, The Rise and Reign of Mike Krzyzewski. And in your day job, you're at the New York Post doing other things. You want to say anything about the NFL at this point? I mean, I know you're doing the Giants thing and Winks up there and whatnot, but just the ownership thing, you talk about too big to fail, too big to have accountability, what's going on in Miami, the hiring process, and then just the general issue with ownership in the league and how they're conducting themselves.
Well, the one allegation in the Flores lawsuit, if true, again, Stephen Ross, that he offered to pay Flores, what was it, $100,000 per loss. If that's, and he's denied that vehemently, but if that is proven to be true, that it can't just be he has to sell his team there. That's fixing games. And people have gone to jail for doing that. Again, he has vehemently denied that. So that's a troubling allegation.
Well, if you were accused of it, you'd vehemently deny it too and say, go find the evidence, right? I mean, especially if
you're a billionaire. But he's presumed innocent of that, certainly. But the league has to do a serious investigation. That is a serious charge. Now, the Rooney Rule, of course, doesn't work. It's broken. And I don't know, the league has tried to change billionaire behavior on that front as far as African-American coaches are concerned for a long time, and nothing really seems to stick. And I don't know what's going to happen there. It is a joke. Brian Flores never should have been fired in the first place, but I think he did deserve a job as a head coach after beating Belichick 4 times in 3 years and winning 19 games the last 2 years without a top quarterback. That's very hard to do in this league. But one thing that I think organically is going to help the cause is, the barrier between the African-American athlete and the quarterback position is really gone, or 99% gone. And I think it's an offensive league now. I think the head coaches are going to continue to come from the offensive side of the ball more often than not. And I think the more black quarterbacks you have in high school, college, and then in the pros, the more you're going to see quarterback coaches, offensive coordinators, as opposed to defensive coordinators. And I do think, hopefully in the near future, you will see organically a shift where you have a lot of very qualified black coaches on the offensive side of the ball that these billionaires just can't keep passing up. I think
Bieniemy, those guys, right?
Well, and yeah, it's hard for me to believe that Leftwich and Bieniemy competed against each other in a Super Bowl and didn't get a job out of that, right? I mean, you had 2 offensive guys with great quarterbacks. And you're telling me if Bieniemy and Leftwich were white, that at least one of them wouldn't have gotten a job out of that. It's just, to me, that's hard to believe.
Ian O'Connor is here. You can follow him out on the Twitter thing and certainly pick up a book. And hey, I will say this: as much as the Maryland thing bleeds in me, and we've left the ACC forever, and anybody that knows me through all the years would say that the part that really pisses all of us off is we don't get to beat Coach K again, right? Like there's no big, he made sure there was no more Maryland games. Maryland was persona non grata for leaving the whole, there's bad vibes and all of that. But I know as many Duke fans that were made here that were sort of the guys wearing the Yankee hat in the neighborhood too. Ray Bachman, my longtime producer, has a whole closet full of blue stuff with Duke on it. It was easy to root for Duke as well, and I know a lot of folks, even if you didn't like Coach K, it's a story worth reading to know your enemy, correct?
Oh, correct. Absolutely. And I felt that way with Belichick too. I had some Jets fans who were traumatized and tormented by Belichick over basically 2 decades and still read the book and liked it. So, and listen, Maryland earned, I thought Maryland was a very legitimate rival. It was never going to be Duke, North Carolina, but the miracle minute in the Final Four game where Maryland's up, 20 early, and Coach K calls that timeout, and his players feel like they're about to get ripped like never before. And he actually was very calm and relaxing. And he said, guys, we can't play any worse. So if we lose by 40, we lose by 40, but just go out there and have fun. And that changed that game. They made a few shots, got loose. And shockingly enough, Maryland lost that Final Four game. But yeah, so I think that if you are an opponent, a vanquished opponent of greatness, or a fan of a team that would fit that definition, I still think you can get a lot out of a book about greatness, really. And I think Coach K does represent that.
Ian O'Connor's book is Coach K, The Rise and Reign of Mike Krzyzewski. I miss seeing guys like you around, being media schlubs, going up and down steps to press conferences and sitting in and out of relatively decent press box food in most places these days, and getting out. Are they ever going to let us back in locker rooms?
Yes, I do believe that. Yeah. In fact, I believe you'll see that this coming baseball season.
Huh, you think there's a baseball season? That's
yeah, I
next
do.
Week's topic.
Yeah, that's right.
Ian, I appreciate you, man. Good luck with your book. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks a lot, Nestor.
Always good to see Ian O'Connor at Ravens games and other places, not at Duke, Maryland games anymore, but the book on Coach K is available anywhere you can click and buy a book or a Kindle. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, rekindling the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We'll be letting ourselves play beginning March 4th at Mama's on the Half Shell down in Canton. Come down and get a crab cake with us. Back for more right after this on Baltimore Positive.